Now, part two, focus on innovation, with Dr. Jeannie Kim, Associate Vice Chancellor at the Riverside Community College District. She is presenting her study on the economic development network analysis and the need to galvanize efforts around innovation in the region. Jeannie, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeannie Kim, and I am the Associate Vice Chancellor for Grants and Economic Development at Riverside Community College District. And it's my pleasure this afternoon to be able to present to you some key discoveries as we did a first ever network analysis of our Inland Empire Desert Region ecosystem for economic development. The study was actually brought to us by Innovisor, a company that I contracted with based in Denmark. They do these kinds of network analyses for a variety of different companies around the world. And the point of the network analysis was really to understand why it is that people work together, how is the network actually structured, and what's actually occurring as a result of this interaction between individuals. And that's the typical nature of a network analysis when we're doing it within a company. In this particular network analysis, what we were trying to examine was to understand what is the nature of economic development and workforce development within the Inland Empire and Desert Region. We know historically at this point in time that there has been a lot of activity. We know that after the recession, the Great Recession, our region did not recover as quickly as other regions. We know that we had a much more difficult time in terms of all of the jobs lost, as well as the industries and the difficulties that the industries had in terms of being able to come back to a new normal. And some would even say that we never quite recovered, that we never really regained the jobs that we lost. We didn't regain the industries that were that disappeared. And as a result, while we've been doing a lot of work in relation to redeveloping our areas, we have not fully even recovered from where we were after the Great Recession. And now, of course, we're faced with the post-COVID reality. And so this network analysis, when it was done in January of 2020, or actually fall of last year, and the results were presented in January 2020 for the first time. And while this information is a little bit dated at this point in time, I will say that it's still very relevant because it gives us a path forward in terms of what it is that we need to be doing, how we might be able to reestablish our networks given the post-COVID crisis, and also to be able to figure out how we can actually be better than before so that we don't actually make the same mistakes as in previous times of having really separate agendas throughout the region. But maybe this time around, we might be able to gather together as one to be able to set a single agenda and a single vision for how we can actually recover together. So without further ado, I will go into the actual findings of the Economic Development Ecosystem Report. So the data foundation for this was actually emails sent out and a survey that was sent out to individuals, companies, and also everybody that was involved in any kind of workforce development or economic development activity throughout the Inland Empire and Desert Region. We had over 250 people that were surveyed, and we received 143 completed surveys and 82 partial surveys. You can see here that there were a number of individuals that were from the Riverside area primarily. The San Bernardino area was second, of course. And then we had the Palm Desert, Rancho Cucamonga, etc. But you can see that we had actually a very good response rate in relation to the geographic demographics and making sure that we had a wide representation from within our region. In terms of the findings, what we found from these individuals was that there was an assumption. And when I first arrived here in the Inland Empire, people were telling me that a lot of the issues that we found were a competition over resources, that the Inland Empire didn't work cooperatively between the two counties, that Riverside County and San Bernardino County had two separate agendas, and that people couldn't see eye to eye. But these were not necessarily what the findings actually show us. One of the key problems has been that we have a lack of sustained depth of efforts. And the other issue is that we have actually a lack of time to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. So while it may have been in the past that we were competing over resources or different priorities, and that even the competing priorities are considered an issue, they were not as prominent in terms of why we couldn't actually sustain our interaction within economic development. It was really because we just couldn't sustain our deep efforts, that everything was on a very cursory level, at a very topical level, instead of being something that had more depth. And a big driver of that was the fact that there is a lack of time. And you'll also see that there are actually a lack of individuals that are participating in this full time as I get further into the survey. The next slide will show that the work with economic development can be perceived as being a little bit frustrating at times and challenging. However, as you see from this slide, you see that 46% of the words in this word cloud are primarily positive words. 31% are neutral words, and 23% may be negative words or challenging words. But people did find, as much as things were exciting, as much as things were frustrating and challenging, they also found that there was a lot of opportunity, that there was great excitement and creativity, and people were very rewarded by their experience in working in workforce and economic development. The individuals also found that the work is very innovative, and that while it is challenging because of the complications, there's definitely a lot of potential. So you can see all of these words, and on the side to the right, the numbers of individuals that identified each of these words. And so you can look at that a little bit more at your leisure. In the next slide, you see how much time is actually being spent on economic and workforce development across our region. And while we had over 250 people actually participate in the survey, you will see that the individuals, 26% of individuals actually spent 20% or less time on actually working on economic development. And there were only about 45 people that were actually working on economic and workforce development full time. Now, this is across the K through 12, through all of the economic and workforce development agencies. It does encompass, as I said before, the businesses, as well as the broader arenas of workforce development. So it is a very broad swath of individuals and respondents that did participate in this survey. And to find only about 45 or 46 people that were actually participating in this in 100% capacity in workforce development and economic development for a region of our size is not quite adequate, I would say. And so, you know, it really does speak to the reason why we cannot sustain our deep efforts, and why things have been far more on a cursory level, and why things are very much at the surface instead of us being able to develop really deep relationships, as well as deep efforts to sustain the movement forward. So again, I think those are all lessons learned and something that we need to pay close attention to as we look at our post-COVID recovery as well. So what is the time actually being spent on? In this next slide, what we see is that the individuals are spending, the respondents were primarily spending most of their time in education and workforce development. So 27% of the respondents were spending a majority of their time on workforce and education development. And business investment and attraction was one of the lowest areas, or the lowest areas, at just 3%. You can see those dots in this T-bar show that you have the outliers also sitting there, but majority of the individuals said they spent less than 3% of their time in this arena. Business development and acceleration, only 7% of the time, and 4% of the time being spent on business retention, 3% of the time being, time spent on providing employment opportunities, 4% on innovation and research, and 15% on relationship brokering and facilitation and coordination, and then a 3% in the other category. This really indicates that we're not spending the kind of time that we need in order to build up what we know actually drives economic and workforce development. So while there are a lot of education components, and yes, that does help in terms of the workforce development, we need to make sure that we're also spending time in the business investment and attraction and the development and acceleration arenas and business retention arenas in particular. And the provision of providing employment opportunities. Without those components, we can develop as many people as we want for the workforce, but they are not going to actually have a place to land. And that is not going to actually drive economic development. So we need to have better metrics to be able to show what it is that we're exactly doing to be able to drive the kind of economic development that will yield the business investment and attraction, so that at the very end, that the individuals that are going into the workforce, that are being trained in the workforce, are also able to gain economic mobility on their own, that they will be able to thrive, and that they will also be able to, as the previous panel discussed, be able to make a living, a middle skills wage job that gives them a step-by-step ability to be able to climb that socioeconomic ladder. And that's the only way that we're really going to have sustained economic development within our entire region. We all know that there has been a lot of individuals that are very educated, that have great skill sets, and they live in the Inland Empire. However, they're migrating out. They are headed in the other directions of Orange County to San Diego, to Los Angeles, and even to the Central Valley. And we're losing that talent. And they are being drained out of our areas, even though they reside in our community. This is something that we have to really be attentive to. It's not that we don't have talent. It's that that talent is not actually serving our region. So what can we do to actually pivot on that particular point and be able to attract the businesses that are critical to being able to, again, increase the economic mobility and create an environment where economic development, businesses, companies, individuals can all thrive. In this next slide, you'll see the kinds of industries that we are actually spending time on. So the industries right now are primarily around advanced manufacturing, advanced transportation, agriculture, air quality, business entrepreneurship, construction utilities, cybersecurity. You can read the rest for yourself. And what we're seeing, though, is that first off, these areas were identified as a result of the various studies that have been done around what are the industries that we should be focusing in on. But you can see that they are still less than 20%, well, under that 15% bar of where the industry, the time that we're spending, and it's dispersed across in terms of the areas that we are talking about. But again, it doesn't even hit the 20% mark in terms of the dedicated time that we are giving to any one of these industries. And yet we talk a lot about advanced manufacturing, logistics, transportation. And there is definitely a significant amount of time that's being spent on business entrepreneurship. But do we really have the yield? Do we have the metrics to prove that this is making a difference in our community? I'm not 100% sure. We also have a lot of construction and utilities in our area, but here again, we're only spending about 4% of our time in relation to that industry. Healthcare is a big area for us. We are actually one of the region's most prominent healthcare providers, in the sense that we provide a lot of nurses. So I don't know if you all know this, but Riverside City College has the distinction of producing nurses for our region and also the state of California, and they rank in the state. We have a premier program. We also have Loma Linda University and UCR and all of our medical institutions that are, again, generating and the workforce that's necessary for the healthcare arenas. And yet we haven't really developed this arena as far as we possibly could potentially. And I do know that there are plans in place and that there is movement to revitalize the March Air Force Base with a health community with a business park, and that will hopefully continue to thrive, and that will be on target and on pace given what we've actually just gone through with COVID. In relation to the organizations in this next slide, we see that the people are currently interacting with, and again, these are the respondents, are interacting with Riverside Community Economic Development Agency, UCR is here. So the larger the square or the tile, the more individuals are interacting actually with those organizations. And I know some of these are a little bit difficult to see, but we do have an actual report that can be made available. And I believe can be sent actually to all of you post this particular webinar. But we can see that San Bernardino County Workforce Development Department, the County of San Bernardino, all of the entities that should be represented are relatively represented here. And so we are engaging with one another across the entirety of the various different organizations and types of agencies, both public and private, as well as government and nonprofit. And you can also see here in this next slide that people want to interact more with the following organizations. UCR is identified here as the top with 13 individuals identifying it as a entity that they would like to work more with. And then the Riverside County Economic Development Agency, and then San Bernardino County and the EDA there, as well as the different counties. And of course, WRCOG is also listed here. I think one of the things that is interesting about this particular slide is the variety of institutions and the desire for more interaction with the various different entities. And so these numbers that are here, and also this is true for the slide previous, is that, again, it indicates the number of individuals that identified this organization as one that they would like to work more with, and in the previous slide, one they are already working with. And those are how the tallies were done. In this next slide, we now get to the actual network. This is a very busy network in the sense that it is quite dense. And you can see that all of the respondents are actually highlighted here in orange. And you see the red circle here that shows that that is the core of our network. But the network is represented with the black dots with over 700 individuals. So you can imagine that we have, even though we only had 250 people or so actually respond to the survey, they identified 3 times that number in terms of who was actually a part of our broader network that is working on economic and workforce development. So within the Inland Empire, even though we don't have concrete specific evidence that this work is actually taking place in a more global fashion, we do have evidence here that people are connected. They identify one another. And you can see in the ways that they are actually identified that there are some individuals that are very, very highly connected. And so the larger the orange circle, and you'll be able to see this a little bit better in the next slide, but the larger the orange circle, the greater the connections, the more connections that they have to those black dots and to the other orange dots that are there. And you can see in this slide that you have individuals that are sort of fanned out, and you actually even have some satellites where there is an orange dot in the top right corner here, and a whole bunch of individuals that are just surrounding that one dot. That network along with all of the little 4Zs up on the top left, and in the bottom left, you've got another sort of a smaller network with one individual and 8 or so individuals. And then these 2s and 3s that are here on the bottom of the right screen indicates that there are individuals that are not connected to the network. And then the fans that you see around the actual outside of that red circle also indicate that individuals are connected, but they're very loosely connected, maybe by just one other individual. So you can see that there's an orange dot in this bottom right-hand corner. And then you've got this individual with, again, a ton of people that are connected to them. And then they are connected to one person in the center of within that red circle. What this indicates is that this network is actually quite fragile. So while we have a dense core in the middle, this network is fragile because if that one individual leaves, that fan disappears. So those other 15 or 20 so individuals actually get separated from the network, and they are not tied back in to the core or anything else that's actually taking place. This is the reason why we have not been able to sustain the efforts that we have actually put into motion. The nature of our network, while robust on the surface, is not deep enough. There are not enough points of contact for all of the work that's actually taking place. And therefore, there can be a lot of overlap. And there may also actually be this perceived sense of competition because we're all doing similar kinds of things, but again, not really getting to the depth level that is actually required for sustained economic development to be able to be the result. So now here in the next slide, slide 13, you see the density of the network here again and who our respondents were. So again, 9% were business owners, and we had business owners act as individuals in the network, as well as business owners being the point to senior managers in the public sector, but not necessarily to middle managers. And the reason why we actually included this particular slide was there was a lot of questions about whether or not businesses were represented in this actual network analysis. And so I'm happy to report that we were able to do this. We are hoping to be able to do this network analysis again in the future. And in so doing, we hope that we'll be able to capture more business voices in a direct manner. So now onto the actual core of our ecosystem here on slide 14. So again, those that are in black are those that were nominated but did not respond, and the orange are those that actually did respond. So now when we actually peel away the noise within the network, you can still see that we have this density. And this core is represented by 218 people who were nominated by at least 2 different respondents. You can also see that there is this divide, this white space between 2 relatively large size networks, one on the top left and then the other on the bottom right. And this divide that you see, we call it a gap within the context of network analysis. We are basically seeing that there are some individuals that are sort of sitting in that divide, but again, they are connecting the 2 sides of this network together. So you have one individual here in the black dot that is right here in the middle of the 2, and they are actually a single holder of a very large portion of the core network on the bottom right. And they are the one person that's connecting into a larger larger network core within the top left portion of this network that is being displayed. Again, if that one individual leaves, the network scatters. There are other individuals, but we can see that there are just maybe 3 or 4 individuals that are actually holding the entirety of this core network together. Now, those of you who are cognizant of the various changes that have already taken place within our region, especially within our public sector, may already recognize and realize that it is quite possible that 2 of the individuals that actually are represented here in this network are no longer within our region. So at this point in time, I would dare to posit that our network may be very fragmented, and we are actually experiencing that, at least in my department and in our area. We are trying to create the bilateral communications with both counties. We are trying to create a system where all of us are actually working together. But again, key individuals at this point in time are missing, and those positions have yet to be fully filled. And the economic development arenas are still sort of scrambling as a result of those missing individuals. So again, it just goes to illustrate the fragility of our network, and that at the end of the day, it's the individuals that make the difference, and it's the individuals that actually create the network that we need in order to be able to get things done. So in this next slide, you can see, what the actual barriers in our ecosystem are for getting things done. Tenure in the region, so how long an individual had been in the region, had no bearing on whether or not they were effective in terms of being a network builder. The hierarchy actually did make a difference, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. The geographic divide, it was non-existent. That divide in the ecosystem in terms of the network that I showed you previously actually is not a result of a ongoing battle between the two counties, for instance. It is not division by geography. And it's also not a division because of function. So it doesn't matter where an individual actually sits, whether or not they're in the private sector, public sector, educational sector, etc. The function and the role that they were playing did not make a significant difference in terms of barriers. We're actually really good at doing across the aisle kinds of collaborations. Now, this issue of hierarchy is a really interesting one. The people are basically looking up. What this tells us is that our network, in its fragility, is also very fragile in the sense that the individuals, the 750 individuals that are a part of the network, for the most part and the majority, do not feel, I should actually recouch that. There are 250 people that actually answered the survey. So of that group, they do not feel that they actually have authority or the resources necessary to be able to execute the actual work that they have been challenged to do. So again, while they have responsibility, they may not actually have the power, nor the authority, nor the resources to be able to execute that responsibility. I don't know about you, but for me, that's a nightmare. That means that individuals are out there trying to get things done, and literally they may be spinning because they're waiting for higher ups to be able to provide those resources. They're waiting for higher ups to make the decisions, and they're waiting on people constantly. And we all know what happens when we're waiting on higher ups. There is a bottleneck, and there's only so much information that can flow in and flow out. And if that's the case, again, our network becomes stagnant. Now, as I indicated previously, if we actually lose those individuals in those higher up positions, then we're in a whole lot of hurt. And I fear that that's part of the challenge that is facing us now in this post-COVID environment. So in the next few slides, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our individuals. So who are these people that, again, were identified as being the core? So in this slide, you'll see how the actual ecosystem works with our members. And this is a slide that was put together by Innovisor and how they actually do the analysis around network viability. And so you have in the upper left-hand corner, the overutilized go-to people. The far right-hand top corner, you have the core members in the yellow, the supporting members that are in the bottom left-hand quadrant, and then the underutilized specialists that are in our bottom right quadrant. And so we want to be able to see actually more individuals that are in the core as well as being supporting members, and less of the overutilized, and definitely we don't want to see a lot of underutilized. However, that is not what we have. In our network, and again, this study was done last fall, and the results are from this January, we find that while we do have some supporting members, there are about 20 individuals that are in this quadrant. We don't have anybody that's being overutilized because they're all spread out so thinly. But we do have these people that are here in this bottom left-hand corner, and that's good. We should have a lot more of these people given the size of our region. Now, what's a little bit disheartening is that we also have quite a few, actually more people that are in the bottom right corner. And as you may recall in the previous slide, that is our underutilized specialists. This means that we are not utilizing the capacity and capability of the individuals that we have, and we don't have enough already working on workforce and economic development. And further, we're not utilizing the specialists that we actually have. That's a double whammy for us. In the top right-hand corner, you can see that we have core individuals, but again, very few core individuals that are actually identified. And again, for a region of our size, this is a little bit troubling. So who are our doers, power players, and influencers? In this next set of slides, we'll sort of look at that a little bit more in depth. So on slide 19, you can see that the doers are identified by their organization. We did not include names. And yes, I do have names, but we aren't sharing them because we promised the survey respondents that we wouldn't. However, we are able to utilize them to a certain degree. But we do have these, the district RCCD is identified, Center for Social Innovation, and a variety of other individuals within the counties. And you can see that majority of them are actually middle managers and senior managers and one business owner. And again, their tenure in the IE is listed here. And again, that was not a determining factor in terms of their level of influence or position within the network. And then the amount of time that they're actually spending on economic development. And you can see the full distribution of the nominations here to the in the bar chart to your right. And the number of nominations is what the count is here on the bar, and that's true also in this next slide. So the power players in this slide actually show us that, again, these are the individuals that are able to interact with, to be the decision makers, to provide support, and actually being able to move things forward. The doers, of course, was self-explanatory to a large extent. They're the individuals that are out getting things done. So the power players are individuals, again, in the various different organizations that are listed here. And they are the ones that we should probably engage more often, meaning that these are individuals that, again, are decision makers, but they also have a lot of influence in the sense that they have answers. And since they are decision makers, they are the ones that are perceived to have the funding that may be necessary, the human and financial capital that may be required in order to be able to move things forward, as well as the influence that might be necessary in order for certain more intractable items to get going. As we say, actually, in our office, they are the individuals that get rid of the BS and the boulders. In the next slide, it is a list of the influencers, and you can see that this list is actually quite small. And again, just 7 or 8 people that are listed here. And they are considered individuals that have actually quite a bit of influence within our region, meaning they have a loud voice, even if they are speaking softly, and what they say is actually heard and listened to. And so these are individuals that we want to engage, again, in the dialogue as we actually develop ideas and put them to the process of actual implementation. So I'm coming to the very end of our presentation, and this is our next to final slide. On this recommendations list, these are still relatively draft, in the sense that we need to actually test them out and see whether or not it actually will work. And of course, as we were about to start moving forward in this arena, we were hit with COVID-19, and so we were not able to progress as far as we would like. But I will say that we have not stagnated. So the main things are that we need to develop a strategy for ecosystem and use it for prioritization. We've had some of those conversations already with Inland Empire Rising, with California Forward, the conversations around the tables with IEGO, and of course, most recently, we have conversations that are taking place via IEEP, as well as through WRCOG, around how the entire region can actually come together and come up with a particular set of strategies that will help drive and actually inspire and spark innovation, as well as entrepreneurship and economic development. Now, because we are actually coming into resetting into a new normal, a completely new normal than what we actually envisioned, it's quite possible that some of the individuals that are a part of this particular slide deck and help to feed this information that I'm presenting to you may not actually be in their respective positions. We know that there have been a lot of layoffs. We know that it has hit middle managers in ways that we did not necessarily experience in previous recessions. And so this COVID-19, post-COVID-19 reality is a little bit different, and it is going to feel a little bit different. So one of the challenges that I see in developing these strategic priorities is again, making sure that we have the brain power, the brain trust, as well as the actual leaders. Because again, we may be in a position where we have to identify new individuals to step into positions, and we may need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people to step into a place where only maybe one person stood previously. So that is one component that I think we have to really consider. We do definitely have to involve our power players, and we need to communicate across the ecosystem, especially to our influencers, but also to the entirety of the network. As a result of the study, I do have the email addresses of those that wanted a copy of this study, and therefore we are able to reach out to them. And we have a plan to be able to do that. And again, we are a little bit delayed in that process because of COVID-19. However, I think the communication component is really critical. And the more that we're able to do this together, the better able that we will actually be able to fully implement depth-oriented strategies that are sustainable and will help us to fully recover from COVID-19 crisis, as well as maybe even make inroads into areas that we've never been able to do so before. So building a structure that supports our strategies is going to be really important. So again, identifying and refocusing the roles of underutilized specialists is one that I'm going to really highlight here. I've talked about the other items previously. But I think, again, identifying who the underutilized specialists are, and again, I do have those names of the individuals, but developing a way to be able to grow our people intentionally and deliberately, I think is what this particular piece needs to speak to. Whether or not you all know who the underutilized specialists are in this survey, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you are actually investing in the people that you have in your organizations. They need to be a part of the conversation. They need to understand the context. They need to understand all of the different opportunities that are being talked about, that are being discussed, so that they can also plug into those opportunities to be the drivers of change. They need to be empowered. They need to be given the resources, not just the responsibilities. They need to be held accountable, but they also need to be given the opportunity to be held accountable. We can't be the single decision makers up at the very top echelon. We have to be able to push that down. And a good strategic plan, a good strategic core of individuals that can help lead that effort are going to be critical in terms of how and whether or not we actually recover from post-COVID in the way that we would like to. So in that last bullet, in relation to engaging the ecosystem to ensure buy-in, of course, that is almost a no-brainer. And as you saw in the previous slides, we do spend a lot of time relationship building and investing in one another to be able to develop the relationship. But it's still not enough. We need to do a little bit more of that, and especially across the various different organizations that are especially represented here as a part of this particular broadcast. So I hope that you found this survey and this study helpful and beneficial, and I hope that we will have an opportunity to actually be able to engage in person at some point in time. However, at this point, I would love to be able to answer any questions that the audience might have. And in this last slide, of course, if you have any questions regarding Innovisor, their information is here, and you are welcome, of course, to be able to contact them as well. So thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to the questions that you may have.
Everyone, Rachel Singer again with WRCOG. Just again, as a reminder for those who would like to submit a question, be sure to go to slido.com or scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen and type in the code #3. And if by chance we don't get to your question in the allotted time, we'll be archiving them and then reaching out to our speakers, in this case, Dr. Jeannie Kim, to provide a written response after, and we'll send that with all of the other supplemental materials at the close of the webinar. So Jeannie, thank you so much for being here with us today. Do you want to start us off by maybe just sharing, and as we look at the poll that was just given, which is, how is it to work with economic development in the region? What 3 words would you use to describe working in workforce and economic development in the region? And it looks like people have voted for challenging. Do you find that surprising?
No, not at all. That's very consistent with actually the survey results previously back in the fall. And if anything else, it's probably doubly more challenging at this point in time, given all the COVID realities. I think the challenge, though, also translates into opportunity. And I think that people do see that component as well, even if there is a little bit of a lag in that excitement around the opportunity. But I'm hopeful that, even as we reset into this new normal, that the challenges will motivate us to do better because our community deserves better.
Definitely. And that's definitely a perspective that you can take when you're approaching those challenges as well. So one of the questions that you actually posed in your presentation was, do we have the metrics to effectively paint a picture of our region to businesses? So I have 2 questions for you. Question 1, do we actually have those metrics? And then question 2, if we do not, what do we need to do in order to get those metrics?
Yeah, I think that we have some semblance of those metrics in a way that, we all have metrics that we have to live by, that we are doing our work and holding ourselves accountable. Now, whether or not that actually is equal or the same metric across all of the different areas of our work, and are we utilizing that super metric, if you will? Do we even have that identified? That's still a little bit of a question in my mind. I would posit, though, that we might want to consider having a super metric, and maybe, that super metric might be, we want to see an X percentage increase in median income of the entire region. Now, moving that number is very, very, very difficult. And it's very specious because there's so many different factors that can lead into that. However, if all of us are working towards that in our various different areas, I really do think that we can see traction and that we'd be able to see movement. But we need to agree that that's the metric that we want to actually change. And that can be an indicator of then the economic growth and the vitality, especially starting at an individual level that drives up to the business and regional levels.
We actually have a question coming in from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. So their question is, what can community colleges and universities do to help strengthen and stabilize the network?
Yeah, I think there are two ways that we can do that primarily. One is, of course, we are institutions of higher education. And so we have an opportunity and also an obligation to be able to educate individuals into this new network with an understanding of what their role can be. So in the presentation, I talked about, the need for accountability and the level of responsibility that individuals are actually given. Again, however, we don't necessarily provide the resources necessary for them to be successful. And that has been a part of our downfall, I think. I have looked at the region 15 years ago prior and had worked with the region back then. We're at a different point now. And there is definitely a palpable difference in the way that we're operating. However, we still don't have a good system for actually educating and growing our people up into the kind of new reality or the vision that we want them to operate in. If anything else, higher education has been perpetuating the status quo. And we have to stop doing that. We have to really ask ourselves, what is it that we really want to accomplish as a result of what we are doing? So one thing, and this is maybe a little bit outside of the scope of what the original intent of that question was we need to really look at our curriculum from the perspective of how do we actually right the economic injustices that our way of operating has actually perpetuated. So because higher ed institutions maintain the status quo, even as much as we would like to be the forerunners and harbingers of innovation, we do really help to keep things just going. We're not necessarily pushing out to that outer edge. So if we could figure out how do we look at this question of economic justice, starting at that student level and educate around that with all of the different components that are necessary from skills to theory and philosophy, then I think we can do something in relation to equipping people to strengthen the network, to understand that they're a node in that network and what their relationship is. And that network mentality will then help to be able to create a broader frame for us to all be able to work together. So it's a languaging and a culture component.
Yeah, definitely. And I really appreciate even the authenticity of your answer of recognizing the role that universities do play and can play in the future of what that opportunity does look like for them. So we have another question from the audience, and it is, how do we better engage private industry and connect education with companies?
Yeah, so I was just having this conversation earlier today, and actually with my group from the economic and workforce development arena. So both in the county as well as within just RCCD. And I have said again and again that our system of how we connect to companies is broken. Higher education never actually finished the bridge from education to workforce. It is a bridge to nowhere as far as I'm concerned at this point in time, meaning that we say, if you get this education, you should be able to get this job. But we did not create a bridge that allows for it to actually manifest for a lot of students. And especially in the community colleges, they need more support than just an if and should. They need directed guidance. They need pathways that are clearer. And so that industry partnership is really critical for making that actually happen. So what does that actually translate into? The industry partners, higher ed needs to get better at being able to understand the fast-paced nature of what industry is having to actually deal in. We need to build our curriculum to meet what the industry demand is. And the industry has been telling us this since 1984, when the Pew Charitable Trust actually did a Pew report and it indicted higher education because we weren't meeting needs then. And we did it again in Spelling's report in the late 1990s and still got indicted again. And so this has been the problem all along, but our processes, which are based in really, good foundations of wanting to have strong curriculum and academic freedom and, to be able to do all of those things, has actually slowed us down. and in our ability to be able to develop and distribute curriculum that is needed right here and right now. And so that particular divide has to get bridged. But how do we actually do that? We have to have industry at the table with us. So just as much as we're making an investment in developing that curriculum, we need industry to be at the table with us every step of the way, and to make the investment of time. And it is going to require their resources to make that investment so that we have a stronger return, right? And that's going to require relationships, trust, and time and energy, and the brain power from the industry in showing us what it is that they would really like from our graduates. And some of that is now starting to take shape because we've got work-based experiences where students are in placements while they're in school. We're sort of going back to the old cooperative education models that allow for that kind of further engagement, which helps us to refine the curriculum. And then we're also doing the apprenticeships, right? Small A as well as the big A in terms of the registered apprenticeships. I think all of those things, along with the guided pathways and the career pathways conversations, is helping us to build better the infrastructure for that bridge, but that bridge still isn't complete. And so again, it's going to be that relationship between the business side, an individual or individuals on the business side, working in partnership with our faculty members to create a solid bridge so that we can actually have students being able to cross over.
Definitely. And it really does sound like people are fulfilling the roles that they are best equipped to do. So just as we expect students to take advantage of internships and apprenticeships, whether that's big A or little a, we hope that institutions and private industry can collaborate on creating curriculum that really is geared towards the end product, which is a goal in industry.
Exactly. I think the other piece of that is that, we don't really know all of the jobs of the future, right? And COVID has really accelerated two things. One is the virtual environment, as well as this rise of the artificial intelligence and the realization that we really don't need as many people in the kinds of positions that we had traditionally. And this is going to come to light more and more as we continue to move forward in our current reality, right? And so that's one component. The other piece is that we've come to recognize, and we've known in higher education for a long time, that there are structural inequities and social injustices and economic injustices, particularly around building wealth, that has been baked into our system. This is why they are called intractable, endemic, wicked problems, right, in society. And so right now, though, all of those things have been laid bare. We're at a point where we can say, you know what? This is not tolerable, and we are not going to stand for this anymore. And so even within our district, the conversations have been, how do we recenter our work to include the economic justice framework, and that is what's driving everything that we are doing. So how do we build wealth at the individual level, communities that did not have that previously? What do we need to do about the infrastructure to be able to help structure that particular foundation? And I said to one of my, staff and managers the other day, building takes a lot of money because you have to find the right location. You've got to do all of the surveys and land surveys before you put any shovel into the ground. And then you got to pour in all the concrete and the rebar and everything else. It's all stuff that we don't ever see again, right? But that's the kind of work that we have to do right now. And I'm hoping that if we do that now, then we will be able to have this transition into the future that will make a big difference in not continuing with the status quo.
Yeah, I think COVID-19 is really providing unique opportunities for our region, as in some ways it feels like a restart button or a refresh button.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have a question coming from Sean from the city of Hoopa Valley, and he says some businesses are located in Western Riverside specifically for the cost savings relative to Orange or LA County. So how can businesses in our region attract talent that resides in Western Riverside County besides the opportunity to avoid the beautiful 91 freeway? And I think there's a little sarcasm in that.
Yeah, for sure. I do that 91 freeway quite often, so I know the pain of that. I think that, one of the things that we're actually in conversations on right now is how do we partner up with the businesses and develop workforce development training centers that are specific to the kinds of industries that, one, we have and that we want to grow, and two, that we want to attract, right? So in Harupa Valley, we've recognized again and again that we don't have any really strong systems of higher education even present right now in Harupa Valley. So that is a shortcoming. But we are in conversations right now of trying to build, to right that particular injustice, I guess, in that regard, because that is a community that needs additional supports. And so we want to potentially establish a workforce development center, again, partnering with the businesses that are there, and to really grow up our workforce, but not just in terms of being individuals that would go and work for other people or for other businesses, but also to be able to build their own businesses. So it's about middle skill, upskill of the employees, but also with this eye towards, again, helping them to move into business ownership and to become job creators themselves and be partners to the other businesses that are there. So if we can build out a network along those lines with that kind of vision, I think that there's a lot of potential. And I don't know who that business individual was, but please give me a call, because we're actively looking for business partners, particularly in Harupa Valley, that might want to join that conversation and building that network up.
Definitely. So we have another question kind of regarding, I think, what they're referring to as the network or the system. So their question is very broad, but it is, what is the ideal system? In your mind, what's the ideal situation and system?
Yeah, the ideal system, and as I explained in the network analysis, is one that is as robust as it is shown on our system, like in the network map that I displayed, but it also has more overlap. So right now there are, the connection points are centered around maybe 20 to 25 people. And that's at the core. If we lose those 20 to 25 individuals out of our network, the network almost dissipates. The connections become very loose. There's the density of that core network sort of disappears.
Right.
That means we have to spend that much more time developing new relationships, establishing trust, figuring out what everybody is supposed to be doing and where everybody is supposed to be. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And if we just keep repeating that particular cycle, which is what most areas actually do, and even most organizations do, because we don't have good succession planning, training programs, development programs, reach one back, bring them up kind of attitudes, we just keep iterating on that very surface level. So in my mind, the ideal network is one that actually has depth and layers. So while we have constantly new relationships forming, and so you've got boundary spanners that are going to be your super network individuals. So we talk about super spreaders, right? In the COVID environment, these are super networks of spreaders, right? Because they can reach out and they can connect with lots of different individuals in a variety of different arenas, and then bring that information and the resources in to the core of the network, and then expand back out again. And that activity continues to broaden the network. We have that at one level. On a secondary level, we have actual systems that are raising people up within our network. So we are deliberately creating a plan for succession. We are actually thinking about how do we grow our individuals that have talent. And we are focusing in on the asset management of our human resources. And thinking about very deliberate and intentional pathways tied to the strategic mission and vision of the region to be able to grow those individuals to take positions that may not, again, exist currently. So it's about doing that in a very deliberate and intentional way. And I think we're there to be able to have some of those kinds of conversations. And then the tertiary level is making sure that there's an entry level component as well. And so while we think about apprenticeships and everything else for middle skill jobs, et cetera, down the line, I ask you, who's going to replace you, Rachel, when you move on? Who's going to replace Alyssa when she moves on?
Mhm.
If we don't have a thought or an idea around that,
Mhm.
we're going to miss out on the network development. And that
Mhm.
network is not going to be able to sustain. So we
Mhm.
have to constantly be thinking about who is going to replace me next, and what is the trajectory for that, and how are we going to continue to grow the talent that we have access to.
Mhm.
And that investment creates loyalty.
Mhm.
And if anything that we've learned from COVID is that relationships matter, and that
Mhm.
humans matter, that the emotional quotient of intelligence and emotional intelligence component matters, that we are not robots. And
Thank goodness.
therefore, yeah, and that we need to make those kinds of investments,
Mhm.
and that is going to be the differentiating factor between artificial intelligence and machine learning taking over the world versus the human element. And
Mhm.
again, I think we've just proven with COVID that we really, really want and desire a human society, not
Mhm.
one that is just automated.
Agreed, definitely. So to close out our time, we have one last question. So it comes from our live audience and it says, how does the gig worker fit within your vision of a workforce of the future?
Yeah. The gig worker is actually probably king or queen, right? Because, or the supreme ruler, whichever one you want to choose. Because I think that in the network, the and it's cuts both ways, because the gig worker has to learn every aspect of business management and being an independent consultant and be able to build out their business as a party of one or maybe a party of two and
Right.
grow from there. Those skill sets are not necessarily easily gained, especially for those that have not traditionally had exposure to those arenas, right?
Mhm.
And so there's a socioeconomic divide in that arena. So I think about it in a number of different ways. One is who's actually serving as that gig worker, and are we getting the representation of diversity that we need in order for us to continue to move our society forward. And if it's only a certain type of person that's going into the gig work arena, is that going to pigeonhole us or direct us in just one kind of a mindset or direction because their experiences are sort of the same? So that question sort of pops for me. The
Mhm.
other part of it is that with the gig worker, there's definitely obviously a lot of opportunity for diversity, and but we have to create those opportunities. So by the way that we actually engage that gig worker, and who we identify, what we actually pay, all of those different kinds of components. And we have to individually in our organizations hold ourselves accountable for the equity and the equality components. And so while we're always looking for the cheapest and the best qualified, if we think from a budgetary perspective, I think we also have to think about how do we actually do this in mind with the social good, because we can't
Mhm.
take advantage of or mistreat our gig workers in this economy. But they are going to be supreme because they are going to be the most versatile.
Mhm.
And they can jump from one place to another with relative ease. And because they are able to hopscotch around, they're also going to be super spreaders of some of the best ideas and the innovation, and could actually bring us all together into the same mindset around particular issues or problems that we need to problem solve together. So I
Mhm.
think the gig workers are really critical, and it is a different way of operating. And there are some issues around the equity and the equality, and of course the pay components that we have to always keep in mind and consider. And that has been one of the questions that have been out there. In the I4J community that I'm a part of, we've been having this conversation for a long time, because we don't want the gig worker to be abused in terms of their knowledge and experience, because it's cheap labor. You know what I mean? And so
Right.
that's the other piece of it. So how do we
Mhm.
again write this in a way that there is a social contract of doing no harm and
Mhm.
trying to do our very best to uplift one another instead of just trying to go after the cheapest, given the budgetary realities as well.
Gig workers obviously play a really critical role in the infrastructure of the network for economic development and beyond. But Jeannie, I'm going to have to close out our time really quick for our live Q&A portion, but thank you so much for taking the time to be on our Future Forward webinar, but then also just for your investment in the region with RCCD. Up next, we're actually going to have a focus on place panel discussion, so stay tuned for that.